In the spring of 1922, on a remote farm hidden among the fields and forests of Bavaria, Germany, 6 people vanished from ordinary life without anyone immediately realizing what had happened. For days, smoke continued to rise from the chimney, the livestock were fed, someone moved through the property, yet every member of the household was already dead. More than a century later, the Hinterkaifeck murders remain one of the most disturbing unsolved crimes in modern history. Not only because of the brutality of the killings, but because evidence suggested the murderer stayed at the farm for several days afterward, living among the victims as though nothing had happened. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders. The story begins in the rural district of Bavaria, approximately 70 kilometers north of Munich. The farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck stood in relative isolation. Dense woods bordered the property. Nearby villages existed, but the farm itself sat apart from the surrounding community. Life here followed familiar rhythms. Animals needed feeding, fields required tending. Days began before sunrise and often ended long after sunset. The family living at Hinterkaifeck consisted of Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, and his wife Cecilia Gruber, 72. Living with them was their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, aged 35. Also on the farm were Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. In late March of 1922, a new maid named Maria Baumgartner arrived to work at the property. These 6 individuals would soon become victims of one of Germany's most infamous unsolved crimes. But before the murders, there were warnings. At least, that is how they would later appear. Several strange events reportedly occurred in the weeks leading up to the killings. Andreas Gruber discovered footprints in the snow leading from nearby woods toward the farm. What disturbed him was that there appeared to be no footprints leading away. Someone seemed to have arrived. No one appeared to have left. There were other unsettling incidents. A newspaper appeared on the property that no member of the household recognized. Keys reportedly went missing. And according to later accounts, unusual sounds were heard coming from the attic. A former maid had allegedly left her employment months earlier after becoming frightened by strange noises she believed originated above the living quarters. Whether these events were connected to the murders remains unknown, yet after the crime they became central to the mystery. On March 31st, 1922, Maria Baumgartner arrived at Hinterkaifeck. Her sister accompanied her to the farm before leaving. It would be the last normal day the household would ever experience. Sometime during the evening, the killer struck. Investigators later concluded that 4 victims were likely drawn into the barn area one at a time. The exact sequence remains uncertain. What is known is that Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia were all murdered inside the barn with a mattock, a farming tool resembling a pickaxe. The attacks were extraordinarily violent. Each victim suffered severe head injuries. Evidence later suggested that little Cecilia survived for several hours after being attacked. According to autopsy findings, she tore out clumps of her own hair while lying injured in the straw. After killing the 4 victims in the barn, the murderer entered the house. There, Maria Baumgartner was killed in her room. 2-year-old Joseph was also murdered. Within a single night, the entire household had been wiped out. Yet the crime did not end there. What happened next transformed a horrific murder into a legend of criminal history. The killer stayed. Days passed. No one immediately checked on the family. The farm's isolated location helped conceal what had occurred. Witnesses later reported seeing signs that someone remained on the property after the murders. Smoke continued to emerge from the chimney. Animals were fed and cared for. Food was consumed inside the house. Someone maintained the appearance of normal activity. The implication was chilling. The murderer may have spent 3 or 4 days living among the bodies, not hiding, not fleeing, simply remaining at the farm. The discovery finally came on April 4th. Concern began growing after young Cecilia failed to appear at school. The family had also missed church services. Mail and routine communications went unanswered. Neighbors and local residents eventually went to investigate.
Look at the house.
What they found was a scene of unimaginable violence. 4 bodies lay in the barn. They had been partially covered with hay. Inside the house, investigators found Maria Baumgartner and young Joseph. The entire household was dead. Unfortunately, the crime scene was compromised almost immediately. Before forensic investigators could properly secure the area, numerous villagers entered the property. People walked through rooms. Objects were moved. Potential evidence was disturbed. Some individuals reportedly even prepared food inside the house. By modern investigative standards, the scene became heavily contaminated. This would haunt the investigation for decades. Authorities from Munich eventually arrived and began examining the evidence. Autopsies confirmed that the victims had been killed using a mattock. The murder weapon itself was later recovered. It had apparently been hidden on the property, but identifying the killer proved far more difficult. At first, robbery seemed possible, yet valuables remained at the farm. Money had not been taken. The killings appeared intensely personal, but investigators could not determine why. Attention soon turned toward the people connected to the family. One of the most discussed figures was a local farmer named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had known Victoria Gabriel and was believed to have had a close relationship with her. Some rumors even suggested he might have been connected to questions surrounding the paternity of young Joseph. Schlittenbauer's behavior during the discovery of the bodies attracted suspicion among some observers. However, investigators never obtained evidence sufficient to charge him. Other suspects emerged over the years: former workers, local criminals, neighbors, traveling laborers, members of paramilitary groups. Several individuals were investigated repeatedly. None could be conclusively linked to the murders. Theories multiplied. Some believed the killer had secretly lived in the attic before the murders. Others argued the crime involved family disputes, inheritance conflicts, or revenge. Still others suspected a drifter who happened upon the isolated farm. Every theory explained some details. None explained all of them. One particularly strange report emerged from the night of the murders. A local farmer claimed to have seen 2 unidentified figures near the forest close to Hinterkaifeck. Another witness later reported observing smoke from the farm's chimney after the murders should already have occurred. An unidentified person allegedly approached him carrying a lantern before disappearing. Investigators never identified those individuals. Years passed, then decades. Witnesses died, evidence disappeared, memories faded. Yet the fascination with the case only grew. The farm itself did not survive. Less than a year after the murders, the buildings were demolished. Additional items were reportedly discovered during the demolition, including evidence hidden within the structure. But by then, the opportunity for a complete forensic reconstruction had long vanished. Throughout the 20th century, police continued reviewing the case. Investigators revisited suspects, new interviews were conducted, old statements were re-examined. Modern researchers later studied surviving records and attempted fresh analyses. Despite these efforts, no definitive answer emerged. Today, the Hinterkaifeck murders occupy a unique place in true crime history. The case combines nearly every element that fuels enduring mystery: an isolated location, unexplained warnings, a brutal mass murder, a crime scene compromised before investigators arrived, and a killer who may have remained among the victims for days after the attack. More than 100 years have passed since the murders at Hinterkaifeck. No one has ever been convicted. No suspect has ever been definitively identified. The official answer remains the same now as it was in 1922. Unknown offender, unknown motive, unsolved. The farm is gone, the witnesses are gone. Most of the evidence has been lost to history, yet the mystery endures. Somewhere in the shadows of rural Bavaria, 6 lives ended on a spring night in 1922. The identity of the person responsible may never be known. And that uncertainty is precisely why the Hinterkaifeck murders continue to haunt investigators, historians, and true crime researchers more than a century later. The killer vanished. The answers vanished with them. But the questions remain.